Next, Voices for Change on this Juneteenth. Tonight, investing in the community, what local businesses and organizations are doing to impact the lives of future generations.
It starts here because it's just where the biggest pain point is. And also it's my hood, it's where I grew up.
Plus, the effort to bridge the academic achievement gap by having more teachers of color in the classroom. And how black churches helped shape the city of Minneapolis.
Without the black church, we have nothing. The black church still has a voice.
You're watching Fox 9's Voices for Change.
And thank you for joining us for this Voices for Change Juneteenth special. I'm Amy Hockert. Juneteenth is now a federal holiday signed into law by President Biden just last year, but its roots go back more than 150 years. We observe it every June 19th. It was on that date back in 1865 when news about the Emancipation Proclamation finally reached slaves in the city of Galveston, Texas. Federal troops informed the slaves that they were free more than 2 years after President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Well, since then, Black Americans have been celebrating Juneteenth, which is also known as Freedom Day or Emancipation Day. Oftentimes, those celebrations are filled with music, festivals, and community gatherings. And each year, these celebrations grow as more and more states and municipalities across the country start to recognize Juneteenth as an official holiday. And many activists say this is really just the first step in addressing racial injustice. On this Juneteenth, we are looking at some of the many contributions Black Americans have made in Minnesota and across the country. We begin with the first Black-owned bank in Minnesota. It's just one of a handful of minority-owned banks in the country, and now it's open for business. BC O'Neill Erie spoke with the head of the Minneapolis branch, who wants to make banking more inclusive.
I grew up on the South Side. I am a product of that.
A proud graduate of South High School in Minneapolis, after earning a degree at the University of Minnesota, Damon Jenkins pursued a career in banking.
And selfishly, I wanted to be in a seat of influence to help people that look like me.
Now he's taking on a new role, leading First Independence Bank on University Avenue in Southeast Minneapolis, the only Black-owned bank in the Twin Cities.
And this is a really an opportunity to really say, how do we think different? You know, it really gives us a chance to serve different and really bring access to communities that have been cut out of banking, but cut out of resources for quite some time.
With roots in Detroit, First Independence Bank is branching out for the very first time with the support of Wells Fargo, Bremer Bank, Huntington, Bank of America, and U.S. Bank.
I still pinch myself because I go, you have 5 large banks that are competitors parking their shields at the door to get in the same room to get this accomplished, and then they bring in another competitor, a Black-owned bank.
The opportunity leading Jenkins back to where his childhood began, with a commitment to address social and economic inequalities. This new venture, he says, will likely be one of many firsts.
But also people's relationships. We're Black-owned, but we're not Black only. And so we're hopeful that we can have relationships that not just consist of BIPOC communities or Black communities, but all communities, even beyond the Twin Cities. You know, I'm hopeful that we can establish relationships throughout the state of Minnesota.
BC O'Neill Erie, Fox 9.
Well, a St. Paul man is working to connect people of color to careers in banking and finance.
Everybody that I saw that looked like me were people on a very entry-level positions. I started thinking, and I thought, okay, is it by choice?
Clement Marriott launched Empower Staffing last year. It's a recruiting and temp agency specializing in IT, banking, and finance. His focus is on creating a diverse talent pool in an industry he says has fallen short on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I want to help by pushing the narrative and changing that narrative that people believe that IT is unattainable.
They will give you the necessary training to prepare you so that you can function in any environment.
Well, Matthew Oberharber says that the agency helped land him his first banking job in the U.S. for Marriott. Matthew's success just one step in this process toward building a more diverse workforce. And then there's the Minneapolis-based organization that's making some major investments on the city's north side.
We want to make a difference in the hardest places.
In less than a year, the Black Women's Wealth Alliance has acquired a commercial property and 3 residential lots. Their goal here is to build economic power in North Minneapolis, one property at a time. It's an investment that could impact the lives of those living here for generations to come.
What we like to do with that is to just open up a cohort of Black women who can help shape the future of what that land becomes for homes that we hope they own. We need them to have a place that they can thrive in, live in, enjoy, and reinvest themselves into. So that's what we're charged with.
The Black Women's Wealth Alliance has had a lot of support along the way. Sunrise Bank, the City of Minneapolis, and Ortis Capital all financed their building on the corner of Fremont and West Broadway. And the Polad Foundation and Pillsbury United Communities helped with the purchase of those residential lots. Well, churches have long played a prominent role in African American communities. And here in the Twin Cities, Black churches have had a big impact on the development of Minneapolis. Here's Mori Glover.
Black churches have been at the center of Black life in Minneapolis for nearly as long as African Americans have been in the city. Now there's a push to recognize their contributions to the community at large.
It is one of the ways that our community has thrived in the face of adversity and white supremacy. So it's important to understand where that resiliency comes from and not just feel the Black church is just something for Sunday morning.
It's the church that's the driver.
The history of the Black church in Minneapolis was the focus of an online community engagement series to document the legacy of the African American community here. Speakers explained how congregations like St. James AME, which became the first Black church in Minnesota in 1860, and Bethesda Missionary Baptist Church, which became the first Black Baptist church in Minneapolis in the 1880s, not only addressed the spiritual needs of their members, but their social and political needs as well.
The Black church would help people find employment. They would help them find housing. If somebody died, they'd collect the money so the person could be buried. And also the long-term goal of changing the laws and removing oppressive practices was part of the Black church's mission.
There's no greater example of this than Greater Friendship Missionary Baptist Church. In the 1960s, when it was known as Greater Sabathani Baptist Church, its members bought the vacant junior high building across the street and turned it into the Sabathani Community Center, which helped keep the city's largest Black neighborhood from disintegrating after it was torn apart by the construction of 35W through South Minneapolis.
The Black church is still the leading institution in our community. Without the Black church, we have nothing. The Black church still has a voice.
Organizers hope peering into the past will help create a permanent place for Black churches in the city's history.
That we, as African Americans, are part of the history of the city of Minneapolis. That we need to daylight our history amongst ourselves so that we can research, celebrate, have historic markers, and have a presence in Wikipedia, in any articles that are written about the city, that we are there.
For Voices for Change, Mori Glover, Box 9.
Well, Minnesota has one of the nation's worst educational achievement gaps between Black and white students in the country. But a local community college is trying to close that divide. They believe students of color would benefit from having more teachers in the classroom who look like them. Here again is Mori Glover.
For me right now, this is a second chance.
Growing up, Darren Funchess had several men of color who taught him reading, writing, and arithmetic.
I get the questions that you have answered. I can check them off.
Now he is back in the classroom to become a teacher of color himself.
Having somebody be a influence upon you definitely helped me. I had the opportunity to have 6 or 7 different individuals who were African American males, and they all played a major part in my definitely wanting to become a teacher.
Funchess is one of a half dozen students enrolled in a 2-year program at Normandale Community College called Certify. The program started as Black Men in Teaching last fall to recruit and support African American, and Black men to become elementary and high school teachers in Minnesota.
We really like to change the narrative about what the Black man is in American society, using education as a vehicle to do so.
Statistics show about 11% of students enrolled in schools in Minnesota are Black, but only about 1.5% of the state's licensed teachers are African American, and Certify hopes to help close that gap.
If you see that certain demographics have been excluded from society, you need to correct those wrongs. And this program, Certify, is doing just that.
I think my biggest question for you is...
Eventually, Funchess, who works as a paraprofessional in Edina, wants to teach history and African American studies, and in the process inspire young Black students like his Black teachers inspired him.
Having a program like this definitely opens up the door for more men, more African American men, to be able to get into the workforce, become teachers, and definitely put a stamp on giving our students, more so our Black male students, that positive role model, positive imagery that they need.
In Bloomington, Mori Glover, Fox 9.
Well, students in that program receive annual scholarships to cover tuition, fees, books, and supplies, plus a stipend for living expenses. And they also receive academic support, leadership training, and professional mentoring, as well as help transitioning to a 4-year program when they finish at Normandale. Still ahead on this special Juneteenth Voices for Change, she was the first Black nurse at Gillette Children's Hospital in St. Paul. Coming up, how she's using her position to amplify health equality. And she overcame homelessness, and now she's living her dream of helping others facing the same challenge. Her incredible journey coming up next.
You're watching Fox 9's Voices for Change.
That concept of being the only really prepared me to be the only Black nurse at Gillette.
A nurse at Gillette Children's is using her position to do more than amplify health equity. Tammy Sinkfield Mori was the first Black nurse at that hospital, and she is continuing to break barriers and change lives as she highlights the importance of race, gender, and socioeconomic status in healthcare. Here's Mary McGuire.
Growing up, Tammy Sinkfield Mori was the only Black student in her elementary and middle schools. 20 years ago, she was faced with a similar experience, becoming the first Black nurse to ever work at Gillette's Children's Hospital in St. Paul.
That concept of being the only really prepared me to be the only Black nurse at Gillette. I embraced it, and I knew that was going to be an opportunity to help change that landscape for the people we care about.
One traumatizing encounter in her early days as a nurse changed everything. Tammy was caring for a sick child, but one of their family members did not want her in the room.
That grandfather was very racist, and I think that was the first time that I had been called the N-word to my name.
It was then she decided to change the landscape and dedicate her life to harnessing the power of stories to combat prejudices and stereotypes.
It was that situation that really led me to that place where you have to know where everybody's coming from. We have to know the story.
In the wake of George Floyd's murder, Tammy curated and led salons, intimate sessions where people could talk honestly and freely about racism.
Within that first month of June, we hosted 8 salons.
Tammy's work is not only impacting her coworkers, but patients too. She's also using her position to make sure everyone, regardless of their race or gender, receives great, equitable health care.
What it's done is it showed other nurses of color that we can lead change and we can be the change we want to see.
Now, Tammy does plan to expand the concept of story care salons into more communities. She's currently applying for a grant through the University of Minnesota to make that all happen. Reporting in the newsroom, Mary McGuire, Fox 9.
Well, for years, she didn't have a place to call her own. After getting out of homelessness, a local woman has started her own shelter now to give others a hand up. Take a look at Edith's house. It's a 5-bedroom house in North Minneapolis. It's Edith Perlin's dream to house people experiencing homelessness. She was in the same boat back in the early 90s after escaping an abusive relationship in Chicago. Perlin ended up on the streets of Minneapolis, where she battled addiction and lost custody of her 3 children. After serving 13 years in federal prison, Perlin came up with the idea of Edith's house.
So I get them in off the streets, out of jail, out of treatment, out of the shelter, and I bring them in and have the ability to have a conversation and discover what the need is, and pretty much navigate them through the system. It's my mission.
Perlin now has a new dream. She hopes to raise $6 million to open a 30-bed shelter somewhere along West Broadway. One of the most influential Black inventors lived right here in Minnesota. Coming up, we take a look at the legacy of Frederick McKinley Jones and the impact his inventions still have on us today.
You're watching Fox 9's Voices for Change.
She is an elementary school staffer by day, but in her free time, a St. Paul woman is highlighting her heroes. Technically, she's creating comic books, but these aren't your typical caped crusaders. Mercedes Yarbrough's superheroes are Black inventors who have made an impact on American history. She's behind Black to the Future comics. Yarbrough says it's all about making learning fun and empowering students of color.
It's just teaching these kids and empowering them that we do have superpowers and we can make a difference and change the world, but we have to have the vision to do that. And I want to help the kids unlock those superpowers.
Yarbrough is turning those comic books now into curriculum and providing students with a new outlet to learn. She hopes her work reaches even more classrooms in the future. Well, he was one of the most prolific African-American inventors in our nation's history, and he called Minnesota home. Frederick McKinley Jones's most famous invention not only helped create several new industries, but his technology is still very much in use today. Here's Mori Glover.
He was a genius. He saw a problem and solved it.
When you go to the supermarket, your pick of fresh fruits and vegetables is at your fingertips year-round. But did you know an African-American inventor from Minnesota is responsible for creating the technology that makes that possible?
Flowers in the middle of winter, pineapples, coconuts. It was unheard of until Fred came up with an idea. This is the history of Thermo King in Bloomington, starting with Fred Jones and Joe Numero.
Rick Smith is the company historian for Thermo King, which pioneered the refrigerated transport industry more than 80 years ago.
Fred came up with the first mechanical refrigeration unit that would go on the nose of a trailer.
He says it was an invention by employee Frederick McKinley Jones that put the company on the map.
In the big scheme of things, this gentleman did a lot, and it impacts people every day, and you don't even know it.
Jones was born in Cincinnati, Ohio, but as a young man, he ended up in Halleck, Minnesota, maintaining the equipment on a farm owned by the son of railroad magnate James J. Hill. Smith says Jones was a mechanical genius who built an early version of the snowmobile with a car engine and an airplane propeller on the back. He also raced cars, but he often came across bigoted drivers who didn't want to compete against him because of the color of his skin.
He was good at what he did. He knew how to build a car, he knew how to race the car, and he did all the mechanics on it, everything, which was, again, was unheard of at that period of time. Fred did it all.
After serving in World War I, Jones taught himself electronics and created a device to combine sound with motion pictures for the small theater in town. That caught the attention of Minneapolis entrepreneur Joe Numero, who offered Jones a job to improve the sound equipment made by his company without meeting him. But when Jones showed up at his office, at first Numero thought it was a joke.
He thought, this black man standing in the lobby can't possibly be the genius that he heard about. So he kind of started quizzing him. You know, what do you know about microphones? What do you know about speakers? And Fred just told him everything he wanted to hear until Joe finally said, whoa, you're the real guy.
Years later, Numero was playing golf with a friend who owned a trucking business, and he told Numero he wished someone would come up with a refrigerated trailer. Numero bet him $5 his resident genius, Jones, could figure it out.
Joe Numero came back to Fred McKinley Jones and said, hey, I need you to create this refrigerated unit. And within a couple of weeks, we had a prototype, and within a short period of time after that, we had the first mechanical refrigeration unit. So that's how this industry got started, on a bet on a golf course.
The invention became the basis for Numero's new company, Thermo King, in 1938, and Jones received a patent for his invention a couple of years later. The portable air cooling unit allowed trucks to carry fresh food anywhere across the country without spoiling, ushering in the era of the supermarket. During World War II, the military also used Jones's invention to transport and store blood, medicine, and food for troops on the front lines.
I was eating nectarines the other day. I was thinking, how can you eat a nectarine in Minnesota when it's 20 below? Well, that invention that he created in 1938 is the reason why I had those nectarines yesterday.
In all, Jones held more than 60 patents for everything from a portable x-ray machine to an automatic ticket dispenser before he died from lung cancer in 1961. 30 years later, President George Bush Sr. posthumously awarded his widow the National Medal of Technology, making Jones the first African-American to receive the honor.
Being an African-American person, it fills me with joy and pride that he did such a great thing for our society. This is the actual first unit created in 1938.
A refurbished version of Jones's most prominent achievement is on display at Thermo King headquarters, and later versions are still being used to transport life-saving vaccines during the pandemic today, further cementing Jones's legacy for future generations as the king of cool.
We talk about all these great things that are happening now, the Googles and the Microsofts. Well, I say, hey, Fred Jones started something very important back in 1938, and we all are benefiting from it today.
For Voices for Change, Mori Glover, Fox 9.
You can learn more about Fox 9's Voices for Change initiative and the stories that we shared with you this half hour at fox9.com. Thank you so much for joining us for this Voices for Change Juneteenth special.